Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. So when Andrew asked me to speak at this a few months ago, I said I don't know anything about web performance. And he said, it doesn't matter because you can talk about anything that generally helps you speed up getting things on the internet or anything to do with internet businesses. And I thought, okay, I can just about manage that. There's a topic I've been thinking about a lot at the moment, which is the title, I guess. It's the topic of how to build a startup in the current age of there being hundreds of tools and services and products that you can buy, or not even buy, sometimes get for free, and kind of how that dovetails into building things yourself, and what's the most efficient way to get to market as a startup with this kind of new world that we're in. So yeah, loosely on topic, I'd say, and it's kind of hopefully interesting. So a little bit about me to start with. So my granddad taught me to code when I was about 10. He was a nuclear weapons research engineer at the NWRE in Basingstoke, and he taught me to code BASIC on an Acorn Electron from a book. And I copied code from the book into the screen, debugged it. And I think, well, that was amazing. It has made me a bit of a hacker, I should say. I've always been a bit of a hacker. After that, my next experience with coding was on Front Page Express when I first got the internet. I loved the fact that you could kind of make changes, but then view the HTML, and I kind of learned the HTML. I'm sure there are lots of people in the room who are very similar, be it Dreamweaver or Front Page or whatever. But I think that this was for me the beginning of this exciting world of building things to work on the internet. And I think that it's interesting kind of how nowadays we've almost come full circle. I think there's sort of new tools emerging that are much better than this, but allow people to tinker with things in a similar way. So anyway, my next thing I did, the next web app I launched was back in 2005 when I was at uni. And I was much like a lot of people at uni. I was living in a shared house, and I built a little tool just that we use within the 6 housemates to work out to log expenses and calculate how much we all owed each other for different bills and takeaways and things like that. And that year, so many people asked me if I could make a version for them. I thought I should launch it online. Spent the summer basically building this. It's called IOU. It was an expenses sharing calculator, as I said, and I launched it just about when the kind of Web 2.0 boom was kicking off. And it got featured on loads of blogs. People thought I'd raised money and built this startup, and I got all this traffic from nowhere. Unfortunately, I didn't really figure out how to monetize it. I had a free tier and a paid tier, but I could never work out how to get the recurring feature of PayPal's payments to work. So I only ever charged people once off for sort of signing up, and then I've never had any recurring revenue. But believe it or not, I would like to have been able to say right now that it is still online, except that it's not, because I think I've broken something. I had some DNS setting I changed a while ago, and it's currently down. So as far as I can tell, I get about 3 expenses logged a day on it at the moment, or it would have done had it still been. It's still getting used, mostly by people in India, weirdly. But so yeah, I need to get that back online so those people that are still using it don't think they've lost all their expense data. So the next thing that happened was in 2007, I was working as a freelance web designer, and I got introduced to the guys that were starting this company. And they had been working on it for a bit, but they needed someone to build their website, and we kind of one thing led to another, and they convinced me to join as kind of the 7th co-founder back in 2007. And that was quite a fun journey for the 10 years that I was there. I left in 2017, so 10 years later, having been the CTO for 10 years at Graze. And as I said, it was a wild ride, but my decision to step down was largely driven by the fact that kind of Graze had moved into offline retail, and we were selling things to Sainsbury's and Waitrose and all the rest of it. And the tech challenges had kind of shifted from fun web development and product to integrating with ERP systems and IT problems and all that sort of stuff. And I was kind of craving the early days again. So it was time for me to leave. And spent a year kind of messing about, and then finally met the person who'd gone to be my co-founder at this new startup I'm at the moment, which is a company called Tiny. So we're trying to build a completely different sector. We're trying to build a new platform in the childcare space. So we're working with both independent childminders, so people who run little mini nurseries from their home, and parents. And we're trying to build a sort of, best way of describing it to a room of techies is like an Airbnb for independent childcare providers. So the idea is twofold. One, the childcare providers can help take away all their business admin, so manage payments, insurance, find them customers, etc. And on the parent side, it's all about helping them find great quality local childcare providers and connecting them up and managing the whole experience kind of end to end. So we're about a year into the build of this. We're working just in Islington in North London at the moment, trying to sign up as many childcare providers in that area, and we've just started marketing to parents there. So this is kind of my current project. And actually, the reason I give you that story is because I think the thing I'm thinking about a lot at the moment, I'm finding really interesting, is how different it is building a startup now versus what it was like building Graze 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And I'm kind of really increasingly questioning the need to build every little thing that we build among my small engineering team there. Graze at its core was a kind of snack manufacturing business. It wasn't a tech business. And it always made me kind of interested how much tech it really took to kind of get Graze off the ground in the early days. So looking back, just to talk a bit about kind of some of the stuff we ended up doing. Graze was a team of engineers basically building a new food product, and we took it upon ourselves to build everything ourselves. So for example, we needed a subscription billing platform. And so we built a PCI compliant subscription billing platform that had automatic retry logic in it to prevent churn, and it had Visa account updater to allow Visa to update our customers' cards in the background when they got lost. As I said, it was PCI compliant. We went through all of that process. And nowadays that's Stripe, right? We built a system for our marketing team to be able to spin up landing pages and for any campaign that we were running. That's Unbounce. We built the ability to inject marketing tags into those landing pages so that the marketing team could track conversions. You've seen it. And we built on-site A/B testing so that we could optimize and A/B test different sorts of experiences for our users. That's Optimizely. All of these things have launched since we started Graze. We built an email marketing platform which had automation and click tracking and bounce detection. We built a friend referral code system. We built a queuing system for those emails. Actually, believe it or not, I built in MySQL. It was the worst tool for the job ever. It was all I really knew, but we sort of scaled it reasonably well. We even built like a whole warehouse and dispatch management platform, which used to be called, there's a product called OpenERP, it's now called Odoo. All of these things kind of didn't exist when we started Graze. And I look back and I think I might be a very wealthy person if I'd thought about launching each and every one of these products properly, because we didn't. We were just focused on building our snack business. So this has got me thinking a lot, and I guess today I think there's a lot less need to write your own code. So there's been an explosion of SaaS products. We all know about them, I'm sure, but there's hundreds and thousands of products. You just have to go on Product Hunt, and every day there's new ones being launched and debated and discussed. But I think the other thing that's really cool is that APIs and webhooks are pretty much standard now. So compare that to 10, 12 years ago when you maybe had a few of these products out there, but a lot of them weren't open in the way that they are now. And it was often a need to adopt everything or adopt nothing in order to get the slick kind of integrations that we like. But nowadays, yeah, APIs and webhooks come as standards. But there's also been this rise of kind of point and click integration tools and other no-code tools. So things like Zapier, which let you connect up kind of anything with an API or a webhook with other things. And then there's things like Webflow or Airtable if you want to build kind of beautiful responsive websites or relational databases all offline, kind of without writing any code. So I think that's really interesting. We've already talked a bit about infrastructure, but I think that's already shifted enormously. Like Graze had a team of 30 engineers, 2 sysadmins. We were running all of our stack on cloud still, but it was like bare bones cloud. So it was EC2 and it was S3. We had our own MySQL servers on EC2. We built this terrible queuing system that I talked about. Nowadays, you don't need to know anything about that stuff to be able to scale applications almost infinitely. And I think that's fascinating. And I think the other thing that's really great is if you're using all of these different services, then we've got this ability now to use serverless code really simply as the kind of glue between them if we want to. So I've been thinking about this a lot, and I guess I just wanted to talk about today some of the favorites of where I've discovered over the last kind of year or so of building Tiny. So one of them is just Typeform. It's really simple and obvious, but we've got all of our web forms are kind of powered by Typeform, integrated into the pages. And I love that because they're beautiful forms. They work really nicely on mobile. They've got API integrations, so we can pipe the data anywhere. I use the hidden fields to kind of ensure that the forms are being submitted by known users by just putting a kind of cryptographic key in one of the hidden fields on the form so that we know that it's not someone else using it. That Typeform fills in a thing called Pipedrive for us, which I use a lot. So Pipedrive is a really basic kind of CRM system, so customer relationship management system. And Pipedrive works a lot like a kind of typical Kanban board, and that customers can kind of move to left through the pipelines that we've built. So this is our provider board, which lets us track kind of the different providers we're talking to and trying to get them through the flow. But the really cool thing about this is that every time a deal moves from one column to the left, a webhook fires, which means that we can trigger automated emails to go out to them, or send them a form to ask them to do some suitability check, or all sorts of things like that we're using. And that's just, you know, meant loads of automation without writing any code. The next one is Contentful. I love Contentful. Headless CMS is probably a lot of people who use it here. Again, we build all of our provider profile pages with this. It triggers a build in Bitbucket when there's a change. We have built the website with code, I will admit, but I love Contentful as a CMS. And then this is probably my favorite one that I think least people know about, which is this thing called stitch data. So one of the problems we talked about with, or going to come to actually with all of these different platforms, is that data lives everywhere. So trying to do any kind of analytics or working out, you know, joining things together of all of your tools makes it very hard. So I found Stitch, which basically works. It's a platform that does kind of ETL out of the box, point and click ETL, which means you can connect any number of integration sources of data with data warehousing tools like BigQuery or Redshift, and it will handle all of the work of kind of extracting the data from those tools, doing the simple transformations, and then loading them into BigQuery. And the really cool thing is this works with any product that has an API or a webhook. So if you want to just, you've got any product that supports webhooks, you can pump those webhooks into Stitch data. It will capture all of the changes and then push them into your data warehouse. Phenomenal tool. I've got about 15 different tools all pushing data into BigQuery. It means that I can draw insights and do analytics across all of these different tools, even though the data lives all over the place. So some conclusions. So I think it's an amazing time to be building businesses at the moment. So many tools that are out there. Sorry, I got my notes on my phone. Yeah, it's an amazing time without having to reinvent the wheel hundreds of times every year. I think the role of the product manager or the CTO is changing quite a lot. It means, for me, I think the difference is it's much less about kind of architecting an application and more thinking about architecting a big system, and also having to have a really good knowledge of all of the different products and services that are out there. I spend a lot of time kind of on product hunt or Googling things around, like, supposing I found something like Stitch data, then it's like looking at all the alternatives, trying to work out the different ways that different startups around the world have kind of cut the problem, because that, you know, there's not just a linear set of different products, that they all kind of slightly overlap. And I think it's, you know, it's quite a big full-time role to actually really understand how they all work and fit together. I think that selecting the right tools can be really hard. My tip and the only one I can think of really is that it just makes sense to roll your sleeves up and get playing with it. So everything worth its salt has a free tier. Within a few hours of playing with something, I think you can get a really good feel for whether it kind of fits your specific needs. And the final one, as I said earlier, is that combining these different tools with bits of serverless code where you kind of need to customize it is a great way to kind of supercharge the whole sort of package. Drawbacks. So complexity, I think, is going to get messy when we start having lots of tools. And I think really that's just my job to try and keep the number of tools in check, try and minimize them as much as possible, and make sure that we've got them all tracked so that we know where they all are and who kind of owns them. This is a big one that I haven't solved yet. I think lack of config management or different environments and version control is a real problem. You want to roll out a change. Most of these tools don't support those kind of features, and I think that would be great if they did. If Zapier had version control, it would fundamentally change how good it is, in my opinion. I think it will get costly. It's something that people ask me quite a lot when I talk about this stuff. And I think that my perspective is that as a startup, we're all about optimizing for speed to market and speed to learning. At the moment, these things aren't costing me very much, but there's the amount of learning and speed I'm getting from them is worth us either failing or surviving. And I think that is kind of, as far as I'm concerned, the biggest reason to do it. And I can always re-engineer for cost later. You know, Stripe, they're very expensive, but you know, I've always got the choice to move my payment information somewhere else. And actually, I think presented that choice to Stripe and saying we're going to do it, I think you probably find there was some negotiating power when you get to a certain size. And then, yeah, hard to control personal data for GDPRs is a big one as well. I think that personal data is something we've really got to keep an eye on now, and especially where we start pumping personal data into this sort of myriad of tools. But one of the things I found is that the really good ones offer a thing called a data processing agreement that you can enter into as a business which basically means that they become an official data processor from the GDPR perspective. And as long as you declare that in your privacy policy, then it should be fine. And we've talked about data being spread everywhere, but I think there's a great way of using kind of data pipeline tools to bring it all together again. I think that's it. So wrapping it up, I think it's it's a great time, as I said. I think whether it's a startup you're building or a side project, I'd really encourage you to have a play with some of the tools out there. There's a few that I haven't yet played with that I'm really desperate to. Airtable's a big one. I think it's a phenomenal product for building kind of relational databases that have a bit of a spreadsheet look and that everyday people in the business can use, but that actually allow you to model proper relational data with relationships, with different permission controls, and they've got a really good solid API that should mean that you can consume that into an application. So I'm really excited about Airtable. I think, as I said, sorry, I haven't mentioned this yet. There's one called Bubble, which is a tool that lets you build full kind of interactive web apps all in a kind of canvas. And again, some amazing functionality in there. I'm really, really interested in it. I'm going to try and kind of carry on talking about it and learning about it. And then I added this slide just now because I thought I forgot to say it, but we're also hiring at Tiny. We're looking for engineers who might be interested in working in a great kind of socially conscious startup. We'd love to hear from you. Cheers.
Thanks, Ed. Does anybody have any questions? Yes. We'll go to the back first.
Thanks for the talk. So I'm a front-end engineer, and I have a particular interest in front-end performance. I don't know how Contentful works. Contentful works. Yeah. But how have you dealt with kind of like the issues that you might encounter with that level of integration on the front end? But if you're using lots of different services, you don't know what they're doing, what they're injecting on the page. Is that something that?
Yeah, so Contentful, for the website, the question was, how do you make sure with tools like Contentful that it doesn't slow down the page performance by having lots of integrations? With Contentful specifically, we actually use a static site that we build offline when the content shows. So Contentful has a webhook that will trigger my Bitbucket pipeline to build. So actually the website's fully static, which is good. I do think that will be a trade-off for some of these things, though. I think that's not a good. I've luckily had a good answer for Contentful, but I think there'd be if you were using something like Airtable as your back end for your web app, which you might, and I think would be awesome. My view would be it would work out the box, but as soon as your startup started to get some traffic, then you'd need to look at bits of caching infrastructure in place. But I think those are great problems to have once you've proven the business model again. And I think
totally.
Yeah.
I'm not forgetting it's a startup, so there's going to be those compromises against delivery to market. What were you using Optimizely for? A/B testing or?
Yeah, so we had that.
That's a real hog.
Graze, at Graze we used it for web front-end testing. Yeah, I never loved it myself, but it opened up so many opportunities for the team that it was
Thank you.
Yeah, so just going back to your experience at Graze, being that it's a startup closer to the end, maybe when it started scaling, what was the complexity like as you transitioned from when the cost starts spiraling and you had to transition into your either custom tooling or so on? What was the complexity like in terms of moving on?
So I should say this is our sort of philosophy at Graze was really the opposite. We built very much everything ourselves at Graze, and I think that's my kind of contrast is with the new startup is so at Graze, I think we invested heavily early on in scaling infrastructure and kind of built a lot of stuff ourselves. We did have to do a few big migrations over the time, that some of them were cost driven. So I think that's sort of the unproven bit. I think if and when Tiny gets to the scale that Graze does or has, I think I'll come back to you with the answer.
That's the same question. Yeah.
Lots of questions.
I would have a similar question, but maybe a bit of different angle. Is when you go some sort of enterprisey, right? How do you cut off all the tools in terms of supporting all of the tools that you're integrating with? And the second question, having all those tools and APIs, which kind of common and well-shaped in nowadays, why would you need good engineers?
So, yeah, exactly. So that's what. Yeah. So I think how to answer that? I think obviously engineers are critical in any startup. There's loads of things we're building that I wouldn't want to build with no code or with these things, just because I think sometimes the closer you are to a more complex user experience, especially on devices or native apps and that kind of thing, there are tools out there that I haven't mentioned in this that are supposedly able to help you build apps and things. But I think anything you want to do reasonably custom with a good performance and where the customer experience is really critical, I think that's where engineers are important. I think where I think this talk has kind of concluded is that it's the MVPs, it's the prototypes, and it's the internal tools that are really great to be able to build in this sort of world. So, at Graze we had tons of internal tools that were fully featured, really complex, and were all built by my engineering team. So we had a big engineering team, and a big focus of that was on internal tooling. And I think that I feel like I'm most excited about the internal tools in terms of what this sort of stuff unlocks and frees my engineers up. So I think that would be my answer. That would be, where do you need engineers? Would be on stuff that really matters and impacts the customer. Is kind of my theory. It's a theory because we're only a year in. And and the other question was around when you turn enterprisey, how do you kind of reverse out of this and fix it? I don't know. I don't think it's going to happen overnight. I don't think I'm going to suddenly wake up and be, oh shit, Tiny's enterprise level now, and I've got to fix all this. I think we have to keep an eye on kind of when do things break, when do things start to creak, and be good at invest. Because I suppose there's one argument that doing it this way is is another way of taking on a lot of tech debt, right? Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think tech debt's good in the right place, but yeah.
So it might be related to the enterprise question, but do you try to think about potentially some of these tools disappearing? Like, startup gets acquired or startup shuts down, and how do you transition out of that?
That is a good point. I wish I'd put something in there. So I have in the ones that I'm really investing in, I keep an eye on kind of how much funding they've raised, like what the latest story is with them, because sometimes it's quite obvious that they are, they've done their seed round and there's no real proof of, and I think that is a very good point. It's a very, very good point. So we've used one platform in our app, which is our message. We use the messaging between providers and parents. We've integrated a product, and that was actually, I spent sort of a month or two integrating it, and then realized that I didn't have that proof, and I got quite nervous because we'd spent so much time working on it. And then they raised like an $80 million Series C or something. I was like, yes, that buys me a few years. So yeah, that's a really good point.
Alan, did you have a question? Yeah. Do you want to take the microphone so that people, when we record it, it'll appear on the video?
You mentioned the version control and the config. Do any of these providers have things like Terraform providers? Or would that help you? Would you pick one over the other if it happened to have a Terraform provider, for instance?
By that, do you mean the ability to kind of deploy on your own infrastructure? Or
no, just use your own code to define how the SaaS works.
Sorry, yeah, okay. I've not seen that. But
okay, because I know like Fastly have their own VCL and they've got Terraform providers. And obviously Amazon do. And there's no reason why a small company couldn't do it too.
I've not seen it. And that would be brilliant. So cool. Maybe we should talk to them.
Any more? I have a question. So when something breaks, how do you find out which piece of the puzzle is broken?
Yeah.
How do you diagnose it?
I mean, at the moment, the knowledge is within quite a small team. And I think that while that team can all kind of sit around one table and discuss it, it's quite easy to figure out where that would have gone wrong. And I think a lot of them, things like Zapier, have got pretty good logging. So you can see kind of at what point did the different zaps, they call them, go wrong. And you can even replay them. So if something's gone wrong because someone changed something, you can replay the zap and all the data kind of flows through again, which is quite good. That's actually another purpose of the big table integration that I talked about, is that because every single action any of these things trigger is a webhook that gets logged into a table, kind of a append-only table, I can actually see in most cases, I can see every single change. The traceability is probably another one I'd add to that list of sort of tools that we like as good software engineers that we don't have in this world. But yeah,
So you could use something like Honeycomb.io to do the
I
tracing.
don't know that product, but maybe.
Yeah, go look at it. It's pretty nice looking.
Okay.
It's pretty flexible. You
Cool.
just pump structured data into it.
Okay. Yeah.
So, should we give Ed one last final round of applause?